Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 12th chapter in the book of Matthew. We're going to make it all the way up until the first 21 verses. Before we do that, we just want to briefly review what occurs in the preceding chapter. The Messiah's mortal ministry marches forward, yet John the Baptist come to a screeching halt. We find John in prison, and he's going to die after prison, so his ministry is for all intents and purpose ended, and the Messiah acknowledges as much. But while in prison, he sends two representatives to inquire of him, "Are you the coming one, or do we look to another?" And Yahshua answering said to them, "Go report to John what you hear and see. Blind receive sight, and lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and deaf hear. Dead are raised up, and poor are brought the good news. And blessed is he who does not stumble in me." So even John the Baptist stumbled over him at this moment in time. He was in the depths of the despair. Prison can do that to people. And he's wondering if he followed the right one, if he proclaimed the right one. And he hears the news of him reaching his ear, and he wants the reassurance because he has a moment of doubt. But what does he do? It's better to doubt out loud than to harbor unbelief in silence. So he sends someone on his behalf to address his doubt, and his doubt can enhance his faith as much as ours. And the Messiah has nothing but hosannas and praises to sing about his cousin. "Truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has not risen one greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least one in the kingdom of the heaven is greater than he." So if we make it to the kingdom in heaven, we have a lot to look forward to. We will be more exalted and greater than John the Baptist, the greatest of all the prophets, the prophet, as declared by the one to whom all the prophets pointed to alike. And for all the prophets in the law prophesy till John. So John marks the close of an era, the dawn of the fifth dispensation, the dispensation of law, the dispensation of grace is personified in him. And if you want to accept it, he is Elijah who was about to come. So he is the answer and fulfillment of Malachi's prophecy in the 4th chapter, 5th verse. So the second to final verse of the Old Testament ends with a prediction that Elijah will return, and he is declaring him the fulfillment of this promise. "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." That's what he says often when he has to say something important. He has to command our attention. Listen, if you have ears, use them. "For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say, he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, see a man, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And wisdom was declared right by her works." So he's once more comparing himself to John the Baptist, in that John the Baptist was a recluse and ascetic. He was in the edge of the wilderness, a wanderer, and one who wore camel's hair and ate wild locust and honey from a stick. But the Messiah, he entered into a fair weddings and feast, and he sanctified them with his presence. So because the Messiah's, John the Baptist's ministry was more on the fringes of society, whereas the Messiah's was in that very enter, he deigned to reach out to the unlikeliest of characters, the ones to whom the Jewish rabbis would not touch, the sinners and the tax collectors. But this was a mark of his wisdom for his redemptive reach to the unlikeliest and the last. It's just a marvel in their sight, and they cannot understand it. Then he pronounces woe on these cities in which he had done the most miracles, yet they failed to repent. So the miracle was useless for their faith because they did not repent. And it's going to be better for Sodom and Gomorrah than it is going to be for Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum, because they had all the miracles, they had all the witness. Then he thanks the Father in prayer for revealing to him hidden gems that are accessible to the babes and the unlearned, yet hidden from the wise of the world. And then he closes, the final 3 verses are the rest overture. Come to me, all ye who labor and are burdened, and I shall give you rest. Now, there is no asterisk on the all. The all is an unlimited limitation. It extends to all humanity, no matter what your race, religion, background, et al., etc. is. If you are tired and you need rest, his outstretched hands reaches to you, and he will give you the rest that you search. So all these people in other religions are sweating, they're bleeding, they are dying to earn their salvation. Our salvation is already ours by faith through grace, because it's nothing we can do, nothing we can add to it. All we have to do is, and the concept of rest connects to what we read in the lesson itself, the Sabbath. There are 2 incidents on the Sabbath, which is a day of rest. And for my yoke is gentle and my burden is light. This is in contrast to his Pharisaical antagonist, who posed additional demands on the Sabbath, so excessive and inordinate were they that they disrupted the healing on a Sabbath. When God himself in the flesh came into their synagogue, they rejected it because it violated their Sabbath. So they worshiped the rule of religion above the Son of Man himself. Opening verse. At that time Yahshua went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain to eat. So these, in all likelihood, would have been barley fields. That would have been the crop growing there. It was on the Sabbath. And according to the laws of Deuteronomy, a neighbor or a passerby could, one who was treading through another man's fields, could eat of his crop. They just couldn't take a container. They couldn't take any with them. But if they were walking their way through and they had this, there was nothing against that. But their problem was that it was on the Sabbath, and to winnow was work according to there's nothing against it in the laws of Moses, but the Pharisees had other laws, written laws, traditions, which so they added on to, they imposed a burden on the law of Moses, which prevented these men from gratifying their most essential physical need. If we should not starve ourselves on the Sabbath just because we might have to pick up, gather the food itself. A man has to do what he must in such a situation. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not right to do on the Sabbath." So they're watching and they see it, and he's walking one way and his disciples are somewhere, and there are Pharisees in the midst, and they tell him, "Look, your disciples are breakers of the law. They are holding the Sabbath in scant regard. They are violating the law. Our version of the law, we are the enforcers and interpreters of the Mosaic law, but one who is greater than the temple is in their midst," as we eventually read. But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he went into the house of Elohim and ate the showbread, which was not right for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priest." So he reminds their memory of their ancient king, the model monarch, before he was a king, when he was anointed but not yet enthroned. He was on the run from Saul, the anointed, who was trying to kill him, even though David did not kill him when he had the power to do so twice. He had a respect for the anointing that the other anointed lacked. But he sought sanctuary and solace from these priests. And what did him and his men do? Because they were on the run, they ate the food that was reserved for the priest. Now that was in some sense it was a violation against the protocol, but the human needs supersede the rules and rituals at the point. When you worship the rules itself, then you are bound and entangled, and you cannot honor and live up to it. So it's just a dead-end trap. But if David could do it, the disciples were not as an emergency, but they had, legitimate hunger needs, and they were not sinning to satisfy them on this day or on that occasion. Or did you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? So the priest, they work on the Sabbath. Sabbath is not a day off from them. That is their day of work. Especially, it's more than a 1 day week job, but certainly the day that they work above all others is on the Sabbath day. And if they are working, are they profaning? No, because the Sabbath, the enrichment of the Sabbath service requires work. So it's an oversimplification to suggest that we all must rest on the Sabbath, because if the world keeps spinning on the same rate it is on the Sabbath when we rest, that guess what? That means that our indefatigable Father in heaven is still working on our behalf. And they are blameless. Of course they are blameless for working on the Sabbath, because they are the ones making the Sabbath meaningful and enriching to their community. But I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. That's the man himself. The Pharisees, besides worshiping rules, the Jews rather worship the temple. The Pharisees were more prominent at the synagogue level, whereas the Sadducees reigned supreme at the temple level generally, although they had some balance of power on the Sanhedrin. But the temple was absolutely an object of adoration and worship to the Jewish people, and it was their pride and delight and joy. But he's declaring himself he is of greater treasure than the temple itself. The pride and joy of Israel, here is this beggarly carpenter's son who is declaring himself more valuable than the most sacred treasure in all of Judaism. And he really he crosses the line against the Jewish religious system when in these two episodes here. And if you had not known what this means, I desire compassion and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the blameless. So he's charging them of having a lack of mercy, and this is what Yahweh wants. This is what he made known to Hosea 6:6. This is also cited in Matthew 9:13, again to the Pharisees, because they were less than merciful to the sinners and tax collectors that he was breaking bread with. Remember when he compares himself to John the Baptist in the previous chapter. But if they had the mercy in their heart and were not just going through the rituals, going through the motions, following the rules, that's what people who offer sacrifice in mindless mechanical motion do. They are stuck in that rut of rule and routine, and they are similarly enslaved and encased, the Pharisees that are, and so much so that they condemn the blameless. Their accusation is baseless and without merit. They are looking for trouble, and when you look for trouble, you're going to find it. You're going to imagine something and plant it on your brain that these people are doing something when they're really not doing that. For the Son of Man is master of the Sabbath, so he declares his supremacy over the day itself. He is greater than the temple. He is greater than the day on which we are worshipped. He is sovereign. His sovereignty. Now, the Sabbath exists to worship him, and the Sabbath is made for man, but not man for the Sabbath, as we read elsewhere. So the Pharisees have the reverse priority. They are worshiping the temple and the Sabbath and just their rules and rituals, and ultimately they are worshiping themselves. And then this man comes along who's kind of dragging their disciples away from him and into his orbit. And the fact that he flaunts their Sabbath, he purposely flaunted it, but it was for a purpose. It wasn't just to shove it in their faces. It was to illustrate a point to the present audience and posterity. And having left there, he went into their synagogue. So he was a Jew. He was a practicing Jew. He attended synagogue regularly. This would have been perhaps the same Sabbath day. He was perhaps en route to this Sabbath synagogue, but then again, all it says is that he left there. We can plausibly infer that it was the same day. So this is the same Sabbath day, but this marks a distinct literary transition. What we read before was the dialogue with the Pharisees. Now we read of the event or rather the monologue. It's actually a dialogue, but now we read of the event of the healing, where he declares war in more powerful terms than he already did. And see, there was a man having a withered hand, and they asked him, saying, Is it right to heal on the Sabbath, so as to accuse him? So their question, that it was there's an underlying ulterior motive that's just evil. They want to accuse him. They could care less about the state of repair of this man. They would rather this man get healed so they could have their charge and their pretext against him for breaking their silly sabbatical law they were enslaved to, so much so that it prevented them from accepting and recognizing the Messiah in their midst. So the obvious question to that is yes, hospitals are open on the Sabbath. There are certain days that, you can't just stop the world. The world does keep spinning at the same rate it was, but we should take a day of rest for worship and fellowship of the week. At least one day set aside to especially, dig into the Bible. Everything else you need to be doing as a Christian. And he said to them, What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, does not take hold of it and lift it out? The obvious answer to that question is none of them, because it's human nature. When an animal finds its leg, an animal that you care for, you tend to, and you nourish and cherish, and their life depends on you. If an animal in your care is trapped, you're gonna help. You're not gonna not break. You're not gonna not help them just because it's the Sabbath. Of course, there's an urgency of need which supersedes the just the practical. You have to exist in the world on the Sabbath, and just not everything ceases on the Sabbath. How much more worth is a man than a sheep? So it is right to do good on the Sabbath. Thus he answers their question in the 10th verse. They were trying to accuse him, and now he not only answers to their consternation, but actually does. He shoves it in their face. He is declaring war in doing what he's doing. He's, he's flaunting it right in their faces, saying, I am the master of the Sabbath. This man, his sickness is leaving him right now because I am here, and it is good. It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. You cannot cease doing good. Weary not yourself in doing good works. Galatians 6. Then he said to the man, Stretch out your hands. And he stretched it out, and he was restored, as healthy as the other. So just like that, there's an instantaneousness to the heal. All he said was stretch it out, and this sudden paralysis, this withered hand it was restored as new, rejuvenated, whole, just like, a fully functioning hand from one that was once withered, one that was once paralyzed, one that was once useless, is now in use and operation, and it adds life and spunk to this man's day. This is a handicap that he has been redeemed from, and is as if it never happened. But the Pharisees went out and took counsel against them so as to destroy him. So they are livid by the fact that this man not only, answered the way he did in their dialogue in the grain field, but now the Pharisees are just these. It's no one in particular, but it's his general antagonist, and they are murderously motivated towards him by this point, because he had flaunted the Sabbath laws. Their additional sabbatical laws were sacrosanct in their own imaginations. These were untouchables, yet he did it, and he did it loud and proud and in their face, and so they want to kill him, and eventually they do. But Joshua, knowing it, withdrew from there, and large crowds followed him, and he healed them all. So he knew when to get away. There was hostility. There was mounting violent hostility. He knew they wanted to kill him, so he got out of their neck of the woods. He went another way, and before they could catch up to him, he was gone, but these large crowds followed him. People couldn't get enough of him. There was too many people that couldn't get enough of him, and he healed them all. Excuse me. So his healing touch works no matter what. He does not stop at the synagogue. He keeps healing. He keeps helping. He keeps reaching, and he keeps reaching out and healing people's sickness. And warned them not to make him known. So he knows that he's kind of under the radar of the Pharisees and the ruling religious establishment at this point. He wants to lay low. He tells them, it's good that you followed me, but don't tell people who I am. There are some occasions where he tells people to make known, and they do spread the good news. There are early Gentile evangelists. In order that was spoken by Isaiah the prophet might be filled, saying, Isaiah is the most frequently cited prophet in the New Testament. He is the prophet, the prince of prophets. And what does he write? This is Isaiah 42, verses 1 through 4. See my servant, upon whom I am chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul delights. I shall put my spirit upon him, and he shall declare justice to the nations. Now we witness this to the letter, to the T, in the baptism. He is declared my beloved Son, in whom I delight. And then the Spirit descends upon him on a dove. We witness the Trinity in tandem. The Son is baptized, but the Father's voice comes out from a cloud in heaven, and a Spirit descends like a dove. So they are all there, and the prophet Isaiah wrote of this in these words some 800 years ago. So there's always a prophetic echo, especially in the book of Isaiah. You have to look for the historical fulfillment, the echo when it was fulfilled in one generation, what it means, and also yet to be fulfilled ones. Always remain open to the possibility that prophetic echo can come alive in our times. But this is an element of his sovereignty. His servant is the one who is king. So the servant is the servant of the king. He is the son, but he is also the king himself. He shall not strive nor cry out, nor shall anyone hear his voice in the streets. A crushed reed he shall not break, and smoking flax he shall not quench, till he brings forth justice forever. So a crushed reed, that language was used in the earlier chapter. We didn't read it in our review, but the Messiah asks his audience, did you expect to see a bruised reed, a weed by the wayside, when you came to see John the Baptist? No, you came to see an iron oak, a sturdier thing than a crushed reed. But his motive and intent, his aim and objective is to bring eternal justice. So all rights will be wronged when he returns. It is forever. And the nations shall trust in his name. So the nations, that's plural. That means that more than Israel, more than the nation of Israel, shall trust in his name. And when you trust in his name, you trust in the power that can heal all sicknesses. And before it, demons quake and Satan himself shudders. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.